Hi there, VO2 Max Productions here with a training talk. Today we're going to talk about practice. And by practice, I mean the months and months of training that you do leading up to a key target race. And we're going to focus in kind of on the topic of specificity. And we're talking about the law of specificity in terms of the precise types of specialized training that you could do to prepare for the unique elements of a race course. And each course, especially in ultras, has different demands. Sometimes you got maybe a course with a bunch of little hills that are just rolling like this. Sometimes you got a course that's like two big giant hills, or if it's Mount Washington, maybe it's just one hill that gains 4,700 feet of vertical. So different demands are going to be placed on your body. And so to prepare for those, you're going to need to devise some special workouts into your training to give you that edge, to get your body prepared, because maybe you've never seen the race course, maybe it's your first time out there. So that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. So a lot of coaches, always hound this home, the law of specificity. And a lot of experienced runners already know this. It's pretty straightforward, some may even say common sense, but I've found, and I forget this a lot, that some of the most simple, fundamental things in training are what we overlook because we get too caught up in other details or we're distracted by other training elements and we lose perspective. So it's always good to refresh yourself and say, hey, you know what, this is what I need to really prepare for this race. And that's kind of where these specific types of workouts would come in. So like I just said, in ultras this becomes really important. Over the course of 50 miles or 100 kilometers, little differences like big hills can make or break your race. And the footing, the weather, all sorts of things like that really play a role when you're bonking, when you're pushing your body to its limits. But it also has applications to shorter races, half marathons on the road to marathons on the road. Take, for example, the Boston Marathon. If you're not ready for the opening miles of downhill, followed by the rolling hills in Newton, you're going to have a rude awakening probably, because it's a very tricky course and it takes time to figure that out. Even when I was in college running cross country at Cornell, we would race at Van Cortlandt Park a lot in the Bronx, and it was just an 8-kilometer race, but man, that course took me a couple years to figure out, and it was very tricky because you had these little rolling hills and then you had a giant hill at mile 4, and to execute a race there just took a lot of practice, and we would do key workouts just to focus on that. And then with my time at Hanson's Brooks, we'd actually go out to a marathon course, a road marathon course, about a month or two beforehand and run the entire course several times just in training to prepare for the specific points where we'd see hills, and to mentally prepare, to visualize what was coming and to prepare our body for that. But obviously for most people that's not really practical. You can't just take time off from work to go travel out to a race course. And even I found with ultras now, I'm running the course for the first time, and so you just have to do your best by looking at the course website. And what I do there first is I'll look at an elevation chart, try to find, maybe you have to do a Google map of it, but most course websites have an elevation chart, and that's the first thing I'd look at. I'm going to look at where the big climbs are, how much climbing there is. A 50-mile trail race with 10,000 feet of vertical is, a decent amount of climbing. If you're not prepared for hills, you're going to struggle probably. And not only just looking at the hills, but the types of hills. Trying to calculate the average percent grade and for how long the hill is. Maybe it's a 2-mile hill, maybe it's just a steep hill of 800 meters. So for example, to train for Mount Washington, it required very specific preparation. And even though I was in Oregon and I had all these other hills at my disposal, I actually chose to run on the treadmill, the dreadmill, as we call it, which I hate because it gets so hot. But I'd set that thing at exactly 12% because I knew Mount Washington average grade of 12% for 7.6 miles. I'd just lock it in right there. And that was very specific type of workout. I'd also do it at 10% and 15%, and you can see my workout that I did at 15% in the video link here. However, if you live in the Midwest, maybe you don't have a whole lot of hills and you got to train for a hilly course, you got to get on the treadmill or drive somewhere to find the hills. So we're talking about elevation profile. You study that thing. You try to incorporate that into maybe some of your long runs. Try to simulate a hill on the course at a certain mile point when your body's tired and you're going to have to climb. And the climbing part is very specific mechanics, as well as the downhills. It's going to trash your quads. You need to prepare for that weeks and weeks out from the race. So that's just one thing to look at. So the second aspect we could look at, and this applies mainly to ultra trail or mountain races, is the terrain that we're running on. And I've definitely made a big mistake last month actually it was this month, at the North Face 50 in San Francisco. And I chose to wear more road racing flats, and it was extremely muddy on the course on the second lap. And I didn't know that because I didn't realize how many runners were going to come through and tear up the course on the second lap. Because the first lap I was fine, but it was also a really wet day, and it was really foolish of me to think that I could get away running that course with road racing flats. And I paid dearly for it because I was slipping in the mud, I was falling all over the place, I was bleeding. It was a total disaster. You're wasting so much energy slipping around, having to worry about pulling your hamstring or your groin, or something horrible like that. So study the terrain. Maybe, try to find course pictures. Try to find videos on YouTube of the course. Right now I'm training for the Bandera 100K. That thing's rocky. I could tell just from looking at some people's YouTube videos. And so I'm going to definitely choose my footwear based on what the terrain of the course is going to be like. And that's subject to change based on the weather conditions. It could snow, it could be downpour, and it could get muddy, or you might be slipping on ice on rocks. So that's another thing to look at, and to really maybe bring a variety of different shoes to the race depending on how the course conditions change. But to mentally prepare for that terrain. And also in your training you could pick out trails that are more rocky. So in Boulder I have a lot of rocky trails, and I'm intentionally running on the rockiest, gnarliest trails because I know I'm going to be hopping over rocks in Texas. If it was training for the San Francisco race, it's going to be a mud bath. I don't know, maybe I could take some water out and dump it out on the dry trails and go running around in a mud bath. Maybe I could do a Warrior Dasher Muddy Buddy. I'm joking. But you get the idea. You want to train for the terrain if you can, as long as it's not going to be a totally different climate. But you got to mentally prepare yourself for that also, and pick the right shoes and not make the same mistake that I did. So a third thing you can look at on the race website usually is a course map. It gives you a general direction of where the course is going, so you don't want to get lost. And obviously, my trail record, I've been lost 75% of the time in trail races, ultras that I've done. But I will say in defense that I was either tied for first place or in second place when I got lost. And it was either with Max King or Adam Campbell. And so the only race where I didn't get lost, I was actually alone in the lead. So I'm just, putting that out there on the table. But it's a good idea, whether you're planning on leading the race or maybe finding yourself mid-pack in a gap, to kind of figure out what direction you'll be turning at certain checkpoints, and to maybe even write those down on your arm where the aid stations line up. And this is really important with your nutrition strategy, because say there's an aid station every 5 miles, and then there's the next aid station's 8 miles or 10 miles. That's a pretty big gap to go without gels or without refilling your water bottle. So you have to say, hey, at that aid station before that big gap, I need to grab some extra gels. I need to make sure that I'm putting in the calories because I have a long stretch to go there. And to plan out your nutrition strategy based on where those aid stations are located strategically across the course. And maybe even say, hey, I don't know what they're handing out at the aid stations. Maybe they're not giving out gels. That was the case at the North Face 50. Maybe it's a certain type of gel. Maybe it's a Cliff Shot or a goo. and you're not used to eating that. Well, you better go to the store and buy that and practice eating that during the long run, because you might not digest that well. You know, maybe if you're doing a road marathon, they're only handing out Gatorade endurance formula. Maybe it's Endurox. You know, you don't know. But usually they'll say it on the race website, and if you're not used to that, then you could prepare in advance when you do your workouts, when you do your long runs. And that's another thing to look at. And so that's even a whole different training talk, the whole nutrition strategy of your race. And hopefully I'll get into that later depending on how this video goes. But another thing to look at. So basically, with all these things in mind, you're going to devise certain workouts. Perhaps maybe on your long run you'll incorporate some hills that are close to the % grade and duration of those on your course when you're tired, when you need to develop that uphill running strength the most. And like when I was training for Mount Washington, it was very specific, that 12% grade. It never really breaks at Mount Washington. You don't get a whole lot of flat to recover, and so you have to be prepared to just grind it up that hill at that grade. And it was very steep, and so mechanically, looking at your running form, your muscular development from doing hard workouts, that was a very important thing, and I think it was crucial to my success, at least at that race. And obviously there's some genetic component. Some people have certain strengths and certain weaknesses that, you know, are gonna play a role in the race. You know, some course might be specifically tailored to your strengths. And general training theory says early on in your training, focus on your weaknesses. You know, if you're a bad downhill runner like me, practice your downhill running, especially if you're training for the Boston Marathon. And then later in the training cycle, you focus on your strengths to help build your confidence as you taper for the big race. And that's just kind of a general training theory that's been accepted by most coaches, and that I would also endorse. So other types of hard workouts you could do, you should be doing lots of tempo runs, lactate threshold workouts, and those could really vary in duration. Usually the intensity is around that 80% maximum heart rate, but it depends on what type of workout you're doing, whether it's cruise intervals or maybe a 60-minute progression type of run that gets progressively harder. But you know, you could throw in these elements of varying terrain, of hills, of your nutrition when you take in, you know, certain types of gels or Gatorade or calories, whatever you're drinking, and to try to mimic those in your training so you're more prepared for the race and to visualize that race. So I'm just going to stop there before this video gets really long and boring. I appreciate all your comments. I'll try to get back to as many as I can. I actually don't get notified now every time a person makes a comment on one of my videos, so I'm sorry if I can't answer them all, but I'll try to get back to as many as I can, and I really appreciate the support. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more VO2 Max Productions.